none of us would ever want to endure the living nightmare of discovering that a member of our very own family was responsible for heinous crimes, but that's exactly what happened to the families of these 10 evil killers, whose crimes were kept secrets for years, operating right under their loved ones' noses. When you think about Rex Heuermann, it's almost impossible to imagine how someone who seemed so ordinary could have been hiding such a dark side. By day, Heuermann was just another businessman, a well-respected architect living in Long Island. He had a stable job, a family, and by all outward appearances, a very normal life. You wouldn't look at him and think, oh yeah, that guy's hiding something, but he was. The Long Island serial killer, the Manorville Butcher, the Craigslist Ripper. These were all names given to the unidentified assailant responsible for the Gilgo Beach serial killings. In 2010, police discovered a set of bodies along a stretch of Gilgo Beach. Over time, more bodies were found in the area, leading investigators to believe that a serial killer was at work. The victims were mostly women who worked as escorts and advertised on Craigslist, and their bodies were found in a similar manner, usually wrapped in burlap. The killings were thought to have taken place between 1996 and 2010, and for a long time the case was a complete mystery. That is, until very recently. In 2022, police started to investigate an architect named Rex Heuermann. His cell phone records showed that he'd had contact with 3 of the victims, and his internet history showed he'd been keeping track of the investigation incessantly, as well as looking up some very disturbing things online. Plus, his vehicle had been connected to one of the killings, and one of his hairs was found in one of the burlap sacks containing one of the bodies. On June 6th of 2024, Rex was charged with the killing of 6 women. He's also under investigation for the death of a woman named Valerie Mack in 2000. To the people around him, Richard Cottingham was just another average guy. He had a steady job, seemingly normal life, but his life was anything but normal, at least the part of it he was hiding. Cottingham is now known as the Torso Killer or the Times Square Ripper, and his crimes were just as brutal as they sound. He's currently serving multiple life sentences for his confirmed killings, but he later admitted to much more, telling a journalist in 2009 that he'd taken the lives of 80 to 100 women across the US. Cottingham had managed to keep this hidden from his family and friends for years. He was married with kids, and from the outside, he looked like he was living a standard suburban life. In 1967, Cottingham killed a woman named Nancy Vogel. 2 years later, he got married, and for the next 11 years, he continued his crimes without his family knowing. He was finally arrested in 1980 and has been in prison ever since. The story of the San Francisco witch killers is one of those cases that really makes you question how well you can ever truly know someone. The San Francisco witch killers were involved in a string of horrific killings. They were convicted for 3 killings between 1981 and 1983, which after the last guy doesn't sound like a lot, but that's still 3 people being killed. That's a big deal, no matter how you look at it. And what's incredibly disturbing is how a woman named Jen Carson had to deal with the revelation that her father, James Carson, and her stepmother, Suzanne Barnes, were the ones behind it. Jen Carson was young when she found out the truth about her father and stepmother. Her father and his wife weren't just petty criminals, they'd been responsible for brutal, heinous acts. This obviously had a profound impact on her mental and emotional well-being. In Jen Carson's very own words, "If my father could kill people, then I reasoned anyone could be a killer." I can't imagine how it would feel learning of something like this. Like, how would you ever trust anyone again? You'd look at everyone you met, anyone who got too close, and just constantly be wondering, spending every day with this all-consuming fear that the people around you may not be who they seem. Kerri Rawson's case is also similar. She's the daughter of Dennis Rader, aka the BTK Killer. Dennis Rader chose the nickname BTK himself, which stands for bind, torment, for YouTube guidelines' sake, and kill. He led a double life as one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. To the outside world, he was a respectable man. He had a steady job, he was very active in his church, and he appeared to be a loving family man. But behind closed doors, he was committing these horrific crimes. Kerri Rawson had no idea of the brutal acts her father was committing, of course, but her entire world came crashing down when the truth was finally revealed. Suddenly, she had to face the reality that he was capable of unimaginable violence. Kerri's struggle was incredibly public and personal. As she wrote, "I found out my father was the BTK killer when I was 26. I was in shock and I didn't know how to handle it." Keith Jesperson led a double life for years, all while keeping up the appearance of being a good, upstanding citizen. He had a family and was a truck driver, which made it easy for him to travel and commit his crimes without raising much suspicion. For his daughter, Melissa G. Moore, the revelation that her father was the happy-faced killer was absolutely devastating. In November of 2008, Melissa appeared on Dr. Phil and the Oprah Winfrey Show to talk about her father and her own experience dealing with the aftermath of his crimes. She opened up about how learning the truth about her father completely shattered her world. She described how the discovery left her feeling betrayed and confused. She also appeared on A&E's Monster in My Family, saying, "Being the daughter of a serial killer puts everything into question. Am I worthy? Do I have the right to exist when he took so much away from other people? If I'm happy, is that a slap in the face to the victims' families? I don't want it to be." Richard Beasley used Craigslist to lure victims and commit a series of brutal crimes. He became known as the Craigslist Killer, and his daughter Tanya has had to live with the fact that her very own father was the man responsible for it all. In an episode of A&E's Monster in My Family, once again, Tanya spoke about her feelings of guilt. She shared a particularly disturbing memory. "For the longest time, I just felt guilty because one of the last times I actually spoke with my father, he asked me to make him a Craigslist account. Maybe had I not even had the connection that we did have or the desire to help, do even small things like that, then maybe it wouldn't have happened." And among that personal guilt is also the fear. I don't want anyone to blame me. Now, obviously, none of what happened was her fault. She had no way of knowing her dad was this complete monster, but just imagine having to grapple with that guilt, feeling like you'd inadvertently assisted in your parents' criminal activity. Just a nightmare. Edward Wayne Edwards led a truly terrifying double life. For decades, he was a man who blended into society, working odd jobs, appearing like any other ordinary guy, but in reality, he was a ruthless serial killer. His daughter, April Velasquez, was the one who blew the lid off his secret life. In 2009, she told police about her growing suspicions that her father was involved in the killings of Timothy Hack and Kelly Drew, a young man and woman who'd gone missing in 1980. Her gut feeling came from the strange circumstances surrounding the cases and this unsettling pattern of violence that seemed to follow their family wherever they went. April recalled how she always felt something was off, saying, quote, "There were dead bodies. Someone was always killed wherever we lived." Despite her fears, though, she clung to the hope that her father was just a grumpy old man and not the monster she was growing to suspect. But sadly, her suspicions were warranted, and the reality hit her hard. She described the moment she finally learned the truth, saying, "I literally went into a panic or an anxiety attack, had to pull off the side of the road, and that's when it really hit me that all the suspicions I had about my father were true, and that he was this monster." So far, we've looked mostly at the black sheep of the family, but how about an entire household of bad eggs? The Bender family ran a small inn and general store in Kansas in the 1870s. To their neighbors and travelers, they appeared to be friendly, hard-working folk, and that was true. It's just that they had an added hobby of killing their visitors. The Benders used their inn as a cover for their gruesome crimes. They would lure unsuspecting travelers to their deaths, robbing and killing them before disposing of their bodies. A lot of the time, they'd also sell all their stolen goods. Their inn became infamous as the site where numerous people seemed to vanish without a trace. Their crimes were discovered in the early 1880s, but as for the fate of the Benders, there's some debate on that. Some stories go that they were apprehended, killed by a mob, or possibly even escaped. Gary Ridgeway, infamously known as the Green River Killer, was responsible for the deaths of 49 women in Washington state, dumping most of them near the Green River, and for years he managed to blend in and live what seemed like an ordinary life. To his son Matthew, he was just a regular dad. Despite not being around all the time because of a divorce, Ridgeway made sure to show up for important events like soccer games and even taught Matthew how to ride a bike. In a 2003 interview, Matthew talked about how his dad seemed like any other parent. He had no idea about the horrific crimes his father was committing. It's chilling to learn that Ridgeway would even use photos of his son or show off his son's bedroom to put his victims at ease, pretending to be this caring father that he appeared to be. Matthew was serving as a Marine at Camp Pendleton when his father was arrested. He was living in California at the time of his last public interview, trying to come to grips with the fact that his dad had this dark side completely hidden from him for years. Mikhail Popkov, also known as the Werewolf. Popkov, a former Russian policeman, was arrested for killing and mutilating several women, mostly escorts, between 1992 and 2000. After his arrest, his wife and daughter were adamant that he was innocent, even with this overwhelming evidence and his own confessions. They just refused to believe that the man they knew could be so evil. His daughter Katya was especially affected. She'd always seen her father as a loving, protective man. She said that she always felt safe with him. In 2015, she was interviewed and was still in denial. She was a school teacher, married, and expecting her first child, though, and eventually started to come to terms with who her father really was, even consulting a psychiatrist about the possibility of her offspring inheriting any of her father's, quote, maniac traits. With all that said, I've been your host James, and I will catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.